We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job! You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Alex Kirshner, when I was a kid, many moons ago, I did not understand nor develop an opinion on sponsorship in sports. So much so, I simply just accepted what was put in front of me, that I did not know that Winston cigarettes were a thing. In fact, one day I can distinctly remember going to a convenience store in Georgia with one of my grandparents who smoked. And as they were getting their, I want to say it was Vantage Ultralight 100s. I think that's what my mother's mother smoked. I saw Winston cigarettes and I thought, oh, okay. They named the cigarettes after the racing cars, and I did not understand. There was the other. This is. I swear to God, this intro is not "You're so redneck" win, but I didn't realize there was any other form of racing other than stock car racing. I kind of still argue that.
Eat it, Europeans.
Yeah, I that's really not an anti whatever else it is you watch. It's just like I just don't have the time, and I grew up on one thing, and that's what I watch when I have a chance. But I was like, oh, wow, they like named the cigarette after the race cars. That makes so much sense. Even as a youth, I understood the correlation between heavy tobacco use and watching NASCAR. And I never really thought about it again. And then when I was in college, one of my friends came home from, I want to say it was Dega. And he was like, and he didn't smoke, but at the time I smoked and the other roommate in the house smoked. And he was like, dude, this is my gift to you. And he brought home 3 cartons, not packs, cartons of Winston's that anyone over the age of 18 could just simply like sign a thing at the race and they would give you a carton of cigarettes. This wasn't that long ago before you make jokes about this is like not the 60s. This was a year with a 2 in front of it. Like this was after the millennia. And it's the best entry I have to today's topic, but I just didn't care, and I don't know if I ever will. In fact, it's weird to me, Alex Kirscher. Do you know what the top level of NASCAR is called now?
Is it like the Xfinity Cup or something like that?
It was for a long time, which kind of bothered me. And again, that sort of touches on what we're going to talk about today. But if you were to go and look at the top flight series in NASCAR, it is simply called the NASCAR Cup Series. Bring the cigarettes back. I'm always like to this day, and it's not me trying to be cool or contrarian. I don't encourage smoking at all. I wish I had never done it. And I did it for a pretty long time. I just still call it the Winston Cup. Like if I'm on the phone with my dad, like it's just, I'll never not call it the Winston Cup. So I guess what I'm saying is we should probably have a cigarette company sponsor at least 1, if not 2, college football conferences this fall.
He doesn't mean that in any actionable way. If there's any health
Actually,
advocacy,
I think it's a really good
groups out
idea.
there.
I live like 3 miles from like it's the headquarters for U.S. smokeless tobacco. So you see it on the Nashville skyline. There's a giant old factory with big neon lights, and it says Bruton Snuff, which is I'm not going to explain what snuff is. And they still make like a bunch of, they make a lot of smokeless tobacco here in Nashville. Not the fancy Zen packs that you degenerate youth are using. I'm talking about proper cancer-causing tobacco.
Not my thing.
The only thing I'm good for, and this is exactly where I thought the show would go today, the only thing that I'm good for anymore is if no children I have, or no children period, but no children I have created are around, and also my wife is not around, and I have to do some sort of manual task, I will still go and get a pack of Levi Garrett. If you know, you know, and I'll throw a chaw in as I do something. I would say that happens maybe once or twice a year now. And then I'm good for like a random single cigarette every 18 months. And then an immediate wave of regret. Like immediately I'm like, oh God, absolutely not. So
interesting.
More cigarettes in sports. Yeah. Alex.
Is it confessionals time? Is that what we're doing? We're talking about our smoking
Have you ever
habits?
smoked?
Never had a cigarette.
Have you ever smoked a cigarette?
No. Had a few cigars on
You
celebratory
never,
occasions.
so no one's ever handed you a cigarette. You lit. And you
I have never had a
inhaled all the
cigarette.
way.
You will never find a picture of me smoking. I think I have enough vices. I eat a lot of fried food. I like a couple fingers of gin here and there, maybe more than here and there. So no, cigarettes have never done it for me, but I respect that you acknowledge the way that advertising can become sort of ingratiated to your brain, especially in sports. I certainly don't shame you for it. And I would say this, Stephen, as a lead into the show, I think that we both agree that the Big 12 conference taking on a naming rights sponsor that might make it called something other than the Big 12 actually ain't that big a deal. Doesn't personally bother me that much, though I think I would be more dismayed than you if it were cigarettes.
We'll get into it in a second. I just don't know if I could care at all. I mean, I know there are like unseemly advertisers out there, depending on your mileage. You may not like one thing, like, it may bother you that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like an oil company, but do you remember that happened? Like, was that last season too, or was it 2 seasons ago? Phillips 66 Pac-12 championship. That happened.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, there's going to be a ton of oil.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is
like,
something that bothers you is probably going to be out there. But by and large, I think it's just going to be kind of shrug inducing, but we are going to sort of, I hate this word. I hate it so much. It's so overused, but this is exactly what we're going to do because we saw a lot of dumb things said in the last 2 weeks. We're going to unpack some things today and walk through less about sponsorship and more about the methodology of one Big 12 in a non-football way. A non-football way because we're not doing season previews yet. Alex, if we were to sell the title sponsorship of this podcast, we would need advertisers. Do we have any advertisers?
It's a great question. Actually, I'll tell you a story. This is not even strictly advertising, but I guess it's a show about advertising, so it's all native this week.
Right.
Remember, Stephen, we were in Minneapolis last Labor Day weekend, week 1, to do a live show at Tom's Watch Bar, brought to you by our friends from Nokian Tires. And there was a nice couple at that wedding that I think I remembered because it was a situation which is not really uncommon where the fiance, the male fiance, sort of brought his female partner to the program. And there's a decent bit of that. It doesn't always flow one way gender wise, but there's a decent bit of other shows. And she said something because she was like selected to like kind of by a random drawing to participate in the show in some way. And she let it slip that you were her least favorite on the show of the three of us. Richard Johnson, of course, not here today. And then you two kind of became friends though over the course of the night because I think you told her a story about like a famous musician that you have a connection to. That really impressed her.
I cannot go any further than that. But I broke her brain, and also I only have 2 responses when someone says stuff like that to me. It's either complete indifference or, all right, watch this.
Anyway, you weren't indifferent. You were a little bit hurt, but I could tell that you two really.
I wasn't
bonded.
hurt. It was just weird because we brought her. It's in the live show file, isn't it? Like if you go and listen to the Minneapolis show, because I brought her, this revelation came because we pulled her out of the audience for a bit. And she was how would I say this delicately, very fucking drunk. And so she was like very open with her commentary. And then also, we sort of have like this meet and greet after the show, and she like doubled down and tripled down. And that's when I figured out that I knew something that would kind of like break her brain. And I did. The postscript to this story, Alex, was the next day, we, courtesy of our friends at Nokian, had a big group of people that went to the North Dakota State, Eastern Washington game at the Viking Stadium at US Bank. They were there. And I know she was completely different because it was like, 1:00 in the afternoon. She was still shaking it off, if you will. And very different reception. My favorite was the entire time because, like, imagine you listen to a podcast, you have this parasocial relationship or whatever it's called, and like you go and you take your significant other who doesn't care or actively dislikes a third of the podcast, and then she just like lets all that out because there were multiple times when she was like talking to me unsolicited at the event, and the fiance was like this. Just, I don't know if you're listening right now, you can't really see my face, but just a sort of, it was very like wide-eyed and apologetic. Like she doesn't normally drink this much kind of face or maybe she doesn't. I knew this was going to happen, but I took the risk. Either way, Alex, they're betrothed now. They're legal.
Yeah. They got married a couple weeks ago. They had the kindness to invite the three of us to their wedding.
They did invite us, yes.
In the Twin Cities.
It still makes me laugh.
A first. We could not make it. It's a bit far for all of us given where we live. I think if I had lived there, I might have gone. But really appreciated the offer. Thank you very much, Gabby and Kirk. Congratulations on your nuptials. And look out in your email for a nice treat from Home Field Apparel. From Homefield at homefieldapparel.com. I would tell most of you that you can use the promo code SCD20 for 20% off your first order from Homefield. But Gabby and Kirk, you are going to get some things on the house from our dear friends at Homefield. Congrats to you, Gabby and Kirk. Thanks to Josh, Connor, and crew at Homefield for facilitating this. We really appreciate it.
I definitely want to stay. Hey, I'm going to say this. I definitely want to stay abreast of the relationship. In other words, I know like you're married now. You're probably going to go through kind of like the traditional honeymoon phase. Like if you guys have kids or whatever, like I think we know where the name should go in this regard. Cause I definitely think that her intercession into our show and then my sort of like, I don't know what I would call it. Aggressively empathetic response to her craziness on the show and the budding relationship that we have.
Craziness is strong.
Sure,
and
whatever.
Aggressively empathetic may be strong.
You don't have to please
I stand
everything.
with you, Gabby.
It's okay.
I stand with you. I'm just trying to keep you from trying to get away with too much here. I think it was a perfectly pleasant interaction.
Sure. I think we should touch base with them at all the large milestones of their life, and we'll send them like home field baby clothes one day, or home field. Do they have dogs? I don't know. Like
home field doesn't have dogs now. They don't sell pets.
No, I'm saying our couple here, our happy couple.
I know.
I did not remember what school affiliation she was. I know he is a Georgia fan and alum.
Yes,
I cannot remember.
I was told that there were
She's
a
Midwest,
lot of dogs.
I think.
There were a lot of dogs at the wedding. DAWG.
I want to say
DOG. Yeah.
She's something Midwest. Something
we
Midwest.
Have a chance to come back to it. Anyway, congrats, Gabby and Kirk. We met Gabby and Kirk at the show that was sponsored by our dear friends at Nokian Tires, the tires that we entrust with our safety whenever we are on the road. Want to thank them for their long-standing support of this program as well. I am happy to report that the Nokian tires that I talked about last week performed very well on my weekend trip throughout Southern California this weekend. Thank you so much to Nokian Tires. And thank you to you, our subscribers at SplitZoneDuo.com. That is the home of everything Split Zone Duo on Substack. You get bonus episodes, you get newsletters, you get Q&A opportunities. You get the chance to help us make the show both from a content perspective and a financial perspective and help keep this thing a thriving, independent college football media outlet. So thank you very much to all of our subscribers there at SplitZoneDuo.com. Steven.
That's me.
The reason I was down for this show about the Big 12 today is that I think the Big 12 is kind of in an interesting position right now. Because if you look at the remaining power conferences, I think 3 of them lend themselves to pretty easy narrative description of where they are as business entities, as organizations that are unified or not. And,
they're boring.
And you can, in a way it's boring. I think everyone understands that the SEC in the Big Ten, congrats, you're rich, you're doing great. If you're a bottom half school in those leagues, you're happy for the moment. You probably do have a little bit of looking over your shoulder about what's going to happen to you and how long that revenue is going to continue to be shared equally. And so I'm not saying there's no palace intrigue in those conferences, but you're rich, you're stable, things are pretty good for now if you're in the Big Ten and the SEC. If you're in the ACC, you are not stable, and you understand that things look very, very bad, and that the next time Florida State signs a conference television deal, there's a way better chance that it's with the Big Ten or the SEC than it is with the ACC. And things are very dangerous and things are tenuous, and you don't know that league is really going to be in it for the long haul. And you just pray that it works out if you are a Pitt or a Wake Forest or a Syracuse or even a Virginia Tech or a North Carolina, who knows. But the Big 12, Stephen, kind of compelling because A, it lost its big fish, the 2 defining big fish who brought it together.
Fishes, if you will.
Yeah, when it brought it together from the Southwest Conference and the Big 8 and basically created the Big 12. There would have been none without Texas and Oklahoma kind of leading their groups of schools together. And then things looked for a little period of time in the summer of 2021, especially, like the Big 12 was going to fall apart in the way that the Pac-12 just did. Like it was about to be lights out curtains. And then things just kind of stabilized. And the Big 12 has not only grown net in numbers, and it's going to have 16 teams going forward, but has also managed, against a lot of people's odds, to grow in revenue and to distribute more television revenue, I believe even per school, though I think we'll have to see how the numbers work out with a denominator of 16, than it was before. And the Big 12's current schools have found some financial health in a conference that looked a few years ago like it was really on its deathbed. So, Stephen, I'm into this because trying to figure out what the Big 12 is doing right now and where it's going in the future is a bit more of a fraught topic, a bit more of a harder thing to figure out than it is with, for instance, the ACC.
Well, I wanted to shape this episode as just the time period in which we reacted, we being the greater we reacted to Red River, to the SEC occurring, and then we all wrote the epitaph for the Big 12. And that was a moment. And then the next moment that matters in this story was, oh, no, wait, actually, they killed the Pac-12. It was just a good swerve in the second act. That's all it was. It was a good swerve in the second act. And I want to introduce that framework for our conversation today because we tend to, that's the looser we, y'all, us, I don't know where I fall in this, to be honest with you. I don't think about Brett Yormark a ton, but there's this weird overreaction, I think that's safe to say, Alex, of the, you could say eccentric, you could say goofy, you could say cheesy stuff that goes on in the Big 12. I read a Gannett column. I cannot remember the author this week. Is like a syndicated column where he was like sort of derisively calling Brett Yormark P.T. Barnum. And I thought to myself, that's probably way more of a compliment than you intended. I think they were trying to sort of lean into the whole like, oh, he's creating a circus-like atmosphere. And there's a weird amount of derision from places that also conveniently laud the Big Ten and SEC for, I guess, just being Leviathans. We're getting into this phase where, like, I'm going to paraphrase Hunter S. Thompson, where he said, like, having a favorite NFL team is like cheering for your favorite corporation. But like the chest beating about conferences as we go into this next phase of whatever the hellscape we're living in is, of the Power 2 or Power for whatever the hell we want to call it. It does feel gauche to sort of do the chest beating conference hollering thing. By the way, that's still going to happen, especially in the South. So I kind of like the P.T. Barnum aspect. I don't mind it. I mean, we have to talk about this for a living, Alex. So it does seem like it's fun to bring up. I made a list of kind of like weird stuff. But before we get into that, like, where are you? And then I tell you what, Richard's not here. We're just going to do an average. When they announced that they were going to remove the Big 12 and call it the blank 12, one thing real fast, there was this instant reaction of like, well, there's not 12 teams. So why wouldn't you keep the big and get rid of the 12 if you're going to do this at all? After there was a whole pearl clutching thing about how terrible this is and da-da-da-da-da and all this kind of stuff. Alex, do you know why they're keeping the 12 and not the big?
Yeah, it's because there's only one 12 and there's several bigs. So there's a Big 10. There's also Big Sky. I'm wearing the hoodie right now. This is incredibly stupid if you're looking for, first off, there's no continuity in college football. Everything's vastly different as you go decade to decade. None of the numbers that are still numbers add up. The Pac-12, RIP, the Big 10, the Big 12. I would say at this point, ascribing a number to anything in college sports might be a bad idea from a branding standpoint. But 12 still exists, and it still has some sort of institutional memory amongst both like the fans and the industry. Now, a lot of people have said, like, just go back to Southwest for the vintage fields. The problem is, what? Like, this is a conference that spans from Salt Lake City to Orlando and Cincinnati. So, what? That doesn't work anymore. I get it. I understand the nostalgia. It's super cool. Those logos are badass. That was a fun time in college sports. People were cheating, I would say, at an artistic level. I enjoy that very much. Go read A Payroll to Meet.
We've done those episodes. But they're going to keep 12 in the way that, like, Alex, what's the most famous NBA franchise?
The Lakers, the Knicks,
The Lakers.
the Celtics.
Where does the name Lakers come from?
Minneapolis, Minnesota, I believe.
Okay. We just kind of vibe with it now, right? So that's
Yeah.
the short answer as to why they're keeping the 12 is that from a branding and marketing perspective, God bless them, some company that's probably getting paid way, way too much money, probably in the Dallas area, was like, no, you drop the big because there's other bigs, and then you put the corporate title into there. So that's a simple and easy. It's basic ad brain. Anyone who's listening to this who has a degree in marketing or advertising understood this immediately, but I did see a lot of conjecture about this.
I don't really care.
Is this the only thing that hasn't been tagged short of an actual university or university nickname? This was the other thing that I was going to ask you. I was thinking about this last night. We've tagged every other aspect of the sport minus an actual university.
And uniforms,
right?
But that's probably coming. Uniforms are probably coming too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you can think of?
Just about everything's been tagged. Just about everything's been tagged. I mean,
obviously,
if you're great at marketing, everything is tagged. You know, if you have a big enough brand that companies want to be attached to it. I think that, you know, we're going to go down, like you say, a list here of things that the Big 12 is trying to do right now that are in some way interesting or worth talking about as ideas for a conference to undertake. And I'm not really bothered by this one. I'm just not. Like, I get it. I don't think conferences themselves are very special. They're TV negotiation vehicles. I personally will not call it, if a deal comes together, the All-State 12. I think that's kind of dumb. I'm not paid to use that term. TV broadcasters will. It's not a ton different than, you know,
I will say though,
Birmingham Bowl being called something else for a year or whatnot. It just doesn't really affect my perception of the sport. I think it would be weird if it were the Oklahoma All-State Cowboys, but schools are special. Conferences are not special. Conferences are shells by which television deals are negotiated. I mean, that's why the Big 12 was created too. And so I think that it's just I have to conserve my outrage a little bit because there are other things, even on this very list, that I think are a way bigger threat to.
Yes, we're going to get to the one big
tradition
threat
in college sports,
yeah.
and so hey, if you can rip off a few extra $1 million a year by calling yourselves the All-State 12, okay, Brett Yormark, that's fine. I'm not really bothered
so we had this group of media who were saying that, like, I'm never going to call it the All-State 12 or the whatever AT&T 12, whatever it happens to be. And these are the same people who are working for rights holding media. And that's important, Alex, as you mentioned a second ago, because when you are a rights holder, I don't think we've ever talked about this on the show, but I saw a lot of people pearl clutching and they work for rights holder media. Why does that bother me? It doesn't bother me, but I find it funny because if you work for an outlet that has some sort of contractual agreement with either a bowl or a conference or one of these other things to air the games, and you work for like the .com or you work for the YouTube channel or whatever, those are the outlets that pretty much have to fall in line with what we call preferred labeling. Preferred labeling or preferred reference is this term that kind of bubbled up, I would say probably about more 20 years ago. But if you're in the press in any capacity, I don't care if you're like Chris Fowler calling a game or you work for like teammascotinsider.com, you have a press pass. You go to the game, you receive, and I've thrown all this out years ago, but these big gated like pieces of cardboard, and they're big. They're like the size of like I don't know, like bigger than a Waffle House menu. Okay. And it's cardboard. You fold it out, and those are put in every seat when you go cover a game. They really shouldn't be. They should just really be for radio or television because they offer a list of everyone by number or by last name, sometimes both next to each other, of players, coaches. Then they'll also have a depth chart where as you're calling a game, you can very quickly reference the player by number and not screw it up. They also have pronunciation guides, which is another thing we don't need, like in the written media, for instance. So if you have a funny, like, I don't know, one of Penn State's famous or Pitt's like famous Polish names, there'll be a pronunciation guide for that last name. So also in this, it will say, please refer to X as Y. So for instance, and I'm just going to randomly pick an entity in college football that I've taken a lot of shit for criticizing. You don't call it the Rose Bowl. You don't call it the Rose Bowl if you work for ABC, ESPN. Alex, what do you call it?
The Rose Bowl presented by Prudential or whatever it is.
Prudential, Vizio, Northwestern Mutual. They've had various non-traditional sponsors over the years. And these, by the way, these are on the field too. These are stamped onto the bowl field. So if you're going to say, I'm not going to call it the All-State 12, and you work for any company that has a broadcast rights agreement, you are going to call it whatever they tell you to call it. Also, the universities agree. It's like a subcontractual agreement. I know that's not the right term, but I have talked to lawyers about this. So if you go to the Wisconsin radio show, that's a bad, let me pick an actual Big 12 team, the Utah radio show, and they're talking about the conference and the coaches on the local, coaches show from the local bar, he has to say the All-State 12. That's how this shit's going to work. There are people whose entire jobs, to go back to NASCAR for a second, Alex, but actually one of our friends of the program here who helps us with our advertising, Warren, he used to do this job where they would be assigned to either a university or a coach or something, and they would just police brand and reference. NASCAR has algorithmic capability to check and see how many times a visual ad on the hood or the side of or a spoiler of a vehicle appears on television in a given moment. Obviously, the better the driver, the more successful the driver, the more laps led or the more races won, the hood of that car is going to be more prominently featured on national broadcast television. There are formulas every single week. If someone in the Cialis car or the DuPont car or whatever wins at Bristol, how much that was worth in exposure for 1 week on television when they factor in the actual television rating. This is about to happen in the sport too, and they're going to make you say that. So I know
Are
it
you
sucks.
bothered by it? You sound a little bothered by it.
No, not at all. I was
fair.
just laughing. I was laughing at people because it's weird to see where, what hill people are going to die on. That was the thing that got me, where I was like, it's not even the Heisman. It's the Heisman presented by Nissan. There's nothing in the sport that hasn't been tagged, with the exception of an actual name school. I can't think of anything else. And to transition, Alex, one thing that kind of happened, which I thought was really weird this week, was all of the oxygen got sucked out of, what I'm about to say, but also, it's a pretty quiet news cycle in June over this All-State 12 thing. Ads on football fields will create new revenue for schools preparing to give money to athletes. That was the basic AP headline, right? The NCAA is allowing for commercial-sponsored advertisements on football fields for regular season games. Alex, if this does bother you, and you are a casual fan, chances are you're going to be a lot more freaking bothered by, painting in on some historic stadium that you've always loved, Death Valley, Lane Stadium, whatever, doesn't matter. And then you see a giant, Budweiser or some shaky crypto company or taking up 20 yards worth of real estate on the field, players getting tackled or moving through that advertisement. That's probably going to piss you off a lot more. And we didn't, that got a fraction of the mind share over this fucking Big 12 thing.
Yeah, maybe. I think that this is a bit of a new frontier for American sports. Richard was telling us yesterday. It's pretty common in European soccer. Even
I've been watching the Euro every day, and the Euro is
leagues
inundated with that.
Yeah, no, but even leagues are naming rights, big ones.
Sure,
and so I think maybe that's just a thing that we are going to have to get used to. I don't think it'll ever be. I think that the leagues that have it good, I don't think you're ever going to have the American Football Conference sponsored by Pepsi in the NFL, but maybe that's naive of me. I do think it is fair to put
need the money.
Fair to put a bow on the naming rights thing as something that neither of us is especially bothered by, just maybe out of cynicism. It's just, there's just bigger things going on. You want to talk about some of them?
The Big 12's quirkiness, if you will, or whatever we want to call it in the Yormark era, has obviously coincided with the fact that there's now this evolving Big 2 concept. There's a revenue disparity amongst Big 10 SEC versus everyone else in college football. And this, how far out you stagger that disparity really sort of determines your fate. this isn't really shocking to anybody, but if you're a low-end business or you don't have a majority of the market share, you have to do strange things. You have to iterate. You have to do something that's funny or weird or different to try and gain more market share, right? This is pretty basic business school stuff, which is, again, kind of shocks me that we, I guess maybe, I don't know if I'm saying the media, it's hard to bring what you allege to be a constituency of response these days, because like you see it in corners of social media, you see it written in newspapers or online or .coms or whatever, but you never really know how representative that is of a majority or a silent majority. But I do know that like in the space we sort of play and operate, we've seen a lot of like, oh God, this Big 12 is doing another crazy stupid thing. So obviously we discussed naming rights. The next one that I think drew a lot of, again, sort of weird response, in my opinion, was let's call them strange or non-traditional corporate partners. The WWE. The WWE made a belt for the Big 12. This was laughed at in certain circles. I don't get that. Can you explain that?
Well, it's a little hokey, and people will laugh at hokey. But yeah, the Big 12.
But isn't this a sport sort of founded on hokey?
Yes.
I mean, we literally make up trophies and shit. Like, I mean, shout out to Broken Bits of Chair, but I'm saying like we make up an axe. We make up a bell. We make up a spittoon. Like, how is I think there's a weird thing in our sport where anything that's new or any newness is met with a sort of consternation.
Well, I will say I think you're drawing not a perfect equivalency between like the Indiana Purdue spittoon and WWE, which is a massive arm of a publicly traded company, corporations, yada yada, doing a branding exercise with a college sports
they gave him a belt. Like they gave him
it's a little
belt.
less organic though. Yeah, it's a little less organic.
Like, see, I would push back because like for the last 20 years, I've seen fake belts on sideline, fake belts being just not officially licensed or issued. I mean, once WWE consumed WCW, like they were the dominant, if not sole brand for most of the period of time. And so I've seen countless title belts on sidelines that players have spent the $150 to get the replica one or, whatever. And the WWE finally just saying like, here's a real one to use.
Sure.
Yes. Is it corporate? Definitely. Like, is it? It's not totally inorganic. I don't know. The other one that I remember like getting a lot of people laughing at all the time was the war on I-4 between Central Florida and South Florida, and like it actually made me laugh because it was an actual the Eisenhower system road signs that it kind of has. I don't even know how to describe the shape. Like the standard interstate marker number that you see, like I-5 or I-20 or whatever. It was that like bronzed and sort of sitting in one of those big wooden bases. I was on the field once after that game, and it was very, very quick before the players realized, you know what? You can pull that fucker out like a sword. Essentially, you have a very sharp piece of metal if you pull the sign out of its base. I guess it just, over time, who knows, 30 or 40 years from now, that'll be considered a historic trophy, I guess, at least in that part of Florida.
Maybe. But what I'm interested in about this is that the Big 12, unlike its peer conferences, is doing a few things that are kind of like this. Like they have this little one-off WWE thing. They have a clothing collection with Bathing Ape.
Yeah, that was the next one on my list. Okay, real fast. How many people do you think listening know what Bathing Ape is?
I know what it is.
I don't know.
I can't purport to know much about it other than that it's a clothing company that I'm familiar with, and they do like military looking stuff.
The initial response that I saw was when the logo, the interior coloring of the 12 logo that is like convex on top and bottom, had the camo inside of it. And I remember a lot of people having a reaction to that because ironically they thought it was like, are they doing a deal with Masioc? Are they doing a deal with like Cabela's or like Bass Pro Shops? No, Bathing Ape is a Japanese streetwear fashion brand, and who have used that camo before. I didn't see the problem with this, and then I saw the same reaction of like, "Oh, that's so weird" or whatever. I think it's kind of interesting. I think one thing that like people are struck by is that like Yormark seems to be trying to make a conference a sort of cool entity, and no one's ever really I don't think anyone's ever set out and been like, all right, this is my vision for the ACC or any league, whatever. It's going to be cool. That's just not something that anyone's ever bothered to worry about.
Yeah, this is my thing about this. I think it's kind of dumb, and I don't think it actually has any bearing on the success of the Big 12 going forward. Like, I don't think it's going to create new fans for the conference. I don't think it's going to add stability for the members of the conference or anything like that. I think that it's a branding exercise for the commissioner, and yet it doesn't hurt. And it's the kind of thing that makes the commissioner feel good about himself. And so it happens, even if it's not like an especially useful thing for the members of the conference. I think about the Big 12 commissioning the like basketball anthem last year. Like they worked with like real serious recording artists for like a Big 12 rap jingle sort of thing that they did at their basketball tournament.
Which is fine. I mean,
like, I don't even remember what it sounded like. I heard it one time. I don't think that I saw any groundswell of like Big 12 fans on message boards or on Twitter coalescing and being like, wow, this is so cool. We have so much pride in our conference because this anthem is playing at our basketball tournament. But I think it's indicative of something, which is that the kind of guy, and it usually is a guy who now runs these conferences, is usually someone with Yormark's background rather than a college sports lifer type of person. And so I think you get these business execs, like Yormark was most recently, I think, or very recently at Rock Nation, and you get these suits, these business guys who wear really well-pressed, well-tailored suits, and they have good haircuts, and they walk into these rooms with these conference presidents, and it's like, disrupt. Here's how we got to be different. Here's how we're going to stand apart in the marketplace. And I don't think this does anything for the Big 12. I think that Brett Yormark is sort of very invested in this idea of himself as a celebrity commissioner who moves and shakes and does innovative things that his peers wouldn't do. But the reason that's not a problem is that he's also done the actual job of commissioning pretty well. And helped the conference be stable.
He is very much in the business of Brett Yormark. Like, we have made this joke on the show before about like follow the Dennis Dodd byline of like that guy is reaching out to media and being like, hey, why don't you follow me for a weekend?
Do you remember, Stephen? I remember last year, I actually wrote this down because it was a perfect example of what you're talking about. This was at the Big 12 basketball tournament, and at CBS, Dennis wrote something that started Kansas City, Missouri dateline. As Brett Yormark ducked into a waiting car service Tuesday night, it may have been the first time he was recognized outside the office in his still new job. That's the Big 12 commissioner, gushed a group standing on a street corner as if Paul McCartney had just walked by. End quote. Just pointing out, like, that is Brett Yormark. Brett Yormark set that up.
I think you did this on the show already, but it's one of my favorite Alex's because, like,
but it says something about the way that a commissioner is trying to get himself covered. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not praising like the old guard here.
You implied that prose was fictitious the first time you saw it.
I'm implying that the whole thing is a little bit staged, if not by the reporter, then by people wanting to be seen by a reporter.
I think my favorite situation would not be that if like the reporter was like paid off to write it, because that doesn't happen no matter what people think. I think my favorite situation would be that like the Big 12 paid people to see that. Like they're like, we're gonna hire. Right, what do you want? $50? All right, you and these other 10 people here. You're gonna chant this guy's name as we exit. Like,
but they didn't gush. Okay,
it's like paying homeless people to be in a police lineup.
You don't gush when the commissioner of the Big 12. You don't gush when Roger Goodell walks past
people
you on
gush.
The street.
People gush when Greg Sankey goes places, but that's just the actual college football media.
My point is that Yormark.
It's not real fans. The media gush over Greg Sankey, but not like people.
Sure. Yormark and his crew at the Big 12, who have obviously done a pretty good job placing this kind of story, are really invested in being seen as people doing something different, like as being seen as disruptors.
Yeah,
and I do want to like set apart that, which I think is a fugazi, from the fact that the Big 12 has actually, and I know you want to talk about one of them, one or two of them in particular, has actually had some ideas that are pretty good that like conferences should be doing and that are helping the Big 12 reestablish itself as like playing offense and rather
But I
than,
don't-
than
but I-
being a league
like-
on the decline.
The bathing ape thing, I think, doesn't do anything to like help Kansas State football. But I also don't mind it, and kind of could maybe see the crazy like a fox logic if it draws in if the next bathing ape thing is a higher revenue point or it starts to bring in substantial cash, because the name of the game here is closing the gap. The Big 12 is very public about the fact that like they are going to be I'm careful to use a number here because we don't have all the information yet, but when all the new deals settle in, it will be tens of millions of dollars per school difference between a really good playoff contending Big 12 program and fucking Vanderbilt in terms of the revenue that the conference is sending them. And so that's the order of the day. So if the bathing ape thing now is, let's get weird and experimental and up our sort of Q rating, if you will, with these weird brands, and then maybe that draws in a larger company, like this isn't entirely dissimilar to how Barstool thought for a long time. This isn't entirely dissimilar as to how any niche brand thinks in trying to expand very quickly and in like an identitarian way. The difference is we've never seen a conference act like this. So I could maybe extend the benefit of the doubt, just kind of like stand back and squint. If the next bathing ape is a substantial financial investment from maybe a consumer good or something like that, that again closes a gap or helps the Big 12 pay their, Utahs and Kansas States and UCFs more money more frequently to compete with the SEC and the Big 10. But that hasn't happened yet. Alex, a very simple layup that should not be made fun of at all is that, I don't know, is it officially titled the Big 12 Mexico Initiative, or was that, I don't know if that was a media moniker.
It's titled that. Yeah, it's delayed.
This is not dumb at all.
Yeah. No,
this was announced. Their press release on this was a while ago, but it's because it was delayed. And the new initiative date is for 2025. This is just real simple. They're going to start doing more events and bringing more sports into Mexico. They're going to start bringing more events into foreign markets. By the way, this was something that was discussed a lot, somewhat publicly, but very intensely, privately in the Larry Scott era of the Pac-12, which was, let's take the Pac-12 through the Pacific Rim. This is also where a lot of rumors were born out of them, and like inevitably they were going to take Hawaii and add Hawaii to the Pac-12 just for the structural advantage of it. Of course, that never came to fruition.
Well, hey, the United States sort of did that, as a country, but the Pac-12 did not.
This is a significant interest to me because I have a story that never got finished before Banner Society imploded, and then I was also out on paternity leave, and then the world ended. Our football is so massive and growing too, exponentially growing in Mexico and in Latin America right now. This is a good idea, whether you like it or not. This is a great business idea. If you need proof, the NFL has been to Mexico City umpteen times now. Your Pittsburgh Steelers, Alex, are thought to be the third most popular team in Mexico. Mm-hmm. It's basically like Cowboys, Steelers, Patriots, and that's just because they can get what they get. Like, there's a whole thing about this. I went in to see Ciudad Juarez a couple years ago, and like, I don't know exactly what that story ever might be, but I do know this: like, we are looking at Mexico the wrong way when it comes to American football. So this is one. And by the way, basketball too. If you just bring a preseason tournament to Mexico City, or bring a preseason tournament to one of the resort cities, like, this is not. You're not doing calculus here. This shit's pretty easy, especially when you look at, the bones of us are the Southwest Conference. We are so Texas adjacent, or we used to be. So it makes sense to bring, especially those Texas brands, further south.
Yeah. One of the things that I track now that I think I pay a lot of attention to when conferences are making big announcements, big press releases, is whether the thing that they're doing is ostensibly for the conference office or if it's for the schools of the league. And it really should be for the schools of the league.
That's a very good way to look at things.
With Yormark, like, I think that Brett Yormark does a lot of things, and Larry Scott was the king of this. George Klyavkov was maybe the prince of this. A lot of these commissioners, especially like the business-minded types that I was talking about, do things now that are designed to burnish their credentials and make them look good in stories that get written at CBS Sports or the New York Times or wherever the hell. And the idea is it's image management for the CEO of the conference or the commissioner of the conference. Something like the Big 12 Mexico, I love because what's good for all the geese is good for the gander. Like, it is really cool for every possible stakeholder. If the Big 12 actually goes through this, it's delayed, and I don't want to give them too much credit for something that hasn't happened yet. But let's say
I
it
have
happens.
the updated info when you're ready. By the way,
it's really cool for college athletes to get a trip to Mexico City to go and play a game there. That's maybe the number one city for me in North America that I've not been to that I would just love to go to because everyone says it's an amazing place with a million things to do and great food and great history. You get to send college athletes to go and have a pretty memorable trip. You get to, maybe grow your fan bases a little bit if you are these schools and you kind of push into an area where people might not be that familiar with you. You can do some international recruiting, both for sports and non-sports. You can make a big weekend out of it if you are the school and you are the admissions recruiting people at the school or even the development people at a school. And you can also, I think, if you are a school like BYU or a school like maybe Arizona, whether you have a geographical or a cultural overlap with Mexico, you can make some real hay here. Like BYU is going to be in this league or is already in this league in a minute. So I'm mixing up my years. There's more than a handful of Mormons in Mexico. Like, that is a cool thing for a school like BYU to get to go and play in front of them. And it's a cool thing for schools in border states.
There's more than a handful of Hispanic Mexicans in Utah, in Colorado, in Arizona. Like, one of the big things that they were boasting at the time when they announced this, Alex, was that they had 5 schools less than 400 miles away. That was before they added the 2 Arizona schools. So this is where it becomes kind of a dumb slam dunk. And this is where I just kind of arch my eyebrow a little bit as to why this is considered weird or different or whatever.
I don't know that anyone's considering this one weird. I just, in the interest of guarding against the straw man.
When I talk to people in the industry, here's the only way it was received negatively that I encountered. Mexico is not thought of correctly, in my opinion, as a consumer market because football, and this is dying out. Alex mentioned this a second ago. You have more Brett Yormark brains at the top of the pyramid now than you do sports brains. And football people for years have never looked at Mexico because Mexico does not produce football talent. That's part of the reason, like, coaches have never really given a shit about this giant, massive population below the United States. They would if they started, if they could find a 5-star DB down there or an offensive lineman. By and large, that's not the case. It simply has not translated inside the population. Corporate-minded individuals, the Brett Yormark ad brain dudes, are coming in and being like, there's consumer power here. There's eyeballs that you can put on televisions. There's rights deals that you can establish down here with third-party carriers. This is something I'm weirdly familiar with from the wrestling days where it's like you made X amount of money domestically. You had a deal in domestic United States cable. All right. And then you had different kinds of events that you could do. Live events, you could sell tickets. This is basically the same product as sports. You could go around in arenas or stadiums, what have you. You can sell merchandise. You can do X, Y, and Z. But then you take that model and you just license it across the world, anywhere there's even a remote interest in your sport, if you will, wrestling sport. And that's how you actually survive and thrive and expand as a company, is you just make the same TV show. So in the Big 12's case, you would just have the same basketball games or the same events, and you just sell it to a carrier in a different country. And that's how you make real money. The football part of this was not going to start. It's now scheduled to potentially start in 2026. The assumption here is incorrect, which they have not announced that they would bring games in terms of like conference games into the country yet. The thing that they had pitched initially was that they would establish a Big 12 branded bowl game in Monterey. That's why I say, yeah. So basically an area that's like touristy, essentially, starting in 2026. They were talking about women's soccer, baseball, and basketball. All that stuff makes sense. By the way, there's like 22 million people in the Mexico City area. It's crazy.
Big place.
This is much bigger than I think most Americans realize. I would actually, if it was me, I would scoot this up because the NFL has already established the process and the footprint of just taking a regular season game and playing it down there. I know, like, you might be listening to this as a Big 12 fan, and be like, fuck, I don't want to lose a home game. I get that, but there are ways to do that as a benefit to all the programs. So this is the one, Alex, that we probably thought was the easiest or the most slam dunk or the most like, sure, of course, that makes good business sense. Let's now transition, and I will clear the floor for you, to what anyone with a functioning fucking frontal lobe would realize is a terrible and painfully short-sighted idea.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, but private equity in college sports, I don't want to do anything with a completely broad brush and say that there is never a place anywhere in college sports for institutional money that is expecting exponential returns as private equity tends to expect, and that there's no place ever where like the rich investor types should ever be in college sports. I'm not that naive. I don't want to create that impression. I think for the most part, private equity in college sports is a dog shit idea for the simple mismatch of basically characteristics of private equity wants not a solid couple of points back on their investment. You know, private equity wants to make tons and tons and tons of money. That's what asset managers, private equity, hedge funds, et cetera, want. You know, this is not a typical in retail investment or investment banking operation where, we're just going to hold some S&P index funds and try to make a few percentage points on our money every year. Like, private equity people want to make tons and tons of money. They want to make it hands over fist. And college sports is just not designed to provide that level of return, especially as you have to start paying players. So I think it's a bad idea. And I think that the schools that do it are going to be largely in for a world of hurt. Brett Yormark has been one of the guys who has been leading the push for, hey, we should really explore this at the Big 12. He has been loud and proud about it. Here's what really bugs me about someone like Brett Yormark or any of these other conference commissioners trying to lead a charge into private equity in college sports. It's not even about the market mechanics of why I think it's a mismatch between the type of investor and the product of college sports. It's because Brett Yormark is not going to be here by the time these guys have to get paid back. It's that simple. Like, that's the catch. Like, the catch is that you eventually have to pay them back. They eventually have to make money on this to be happy, or you're in significant financial trouble. And do you really think that Brett Yormark, I mean, I don't know what the time horizon exactly would look like depending on any number of these deals.
It can't be that long. It can't be that long.
Typically at least a handful of years. And then there are cases with certain investments where it's many, many years. But I don't think Brett Yormark's still going to be in this job to deal with the consequences of this. And by the way, I think the same exact thing applies to university presidents and athletic directors who do this. And so if you're Yormark, you get to put out the press release that says Big 12 announces groundbreaking partnership with CVC partners, or Big 12 schools announce this partnership, or whatever. You're probably not going to be the one who is there for the yard sale when it's time to liquidate things to pay these guys back X years from now. And so I just think it's a continuity problem. And I think it's bullshit that administrators and executives in college sports aren't honest about that part of it. Because I think, like, do you really think these commissioners now, these are 5-year jobs. They're not 20, 40-year jobs like they used to be. Like the John Swaffords and the Jim Delaney's.
I mean,
that's done.
It could be 10, but it doesn't change your point. It could be 10. And in his case, it might be if he keeps raising revenue. My dumb assumption here, and I haven't had any of my like finance. In fact, most of the finance bros I know, the broiest of bros, the people who like have the Reagan 84 t-shirt that they wear to their fucking yacht rock parties. Like, this is why it pays to have Republican friends, because they give you Republican information. None of them have been like, this is a good idea. Like, and a lot of them work in PE.
No, look,
like,
I know sometimes like people listen to me and think like, wow, this guy's
are like
I know.
The PE guys are like, I don't, like, they can't figure out the math on the board because their logic, Alex, is, all right, PE hands you this money to Yormark. All right. Yormark's first move, we think, would, God, I hope he doesn't Larry Scott this, is to hand the money essentially to close that gap to the schools, right? Okay, so let's
That's the
follow that
idea.
logic. Let's say that's what he
Yeah.
does, all right? So now, like, I don't know who the premier team in the Big 12 is going to be. Let's just say it's like TCU or Arizona for just for the purpose of this conversation. Let's say it's those two teams. And then they become better on the football field. I mean, this is already a good basketball conference. They become better on the football field. And let's just say they become good enough. One of those schools, by virtue of like whatever it is that money's going to get you, player compensation in the future or facilities, which everyone's moving away from, whatever it is, Alex, let's just say, because this is the logic they're giving us. They win a national title. All right. So TCU goes back to the playoff, or Arizona, or whoever, whatever, Utah, it doesn't matter. One of those schools goes back and it goes to the playoff and wins the fucking thing. What is the ROI on that? What is the financial gain on that to then pay the loan back? Because it sounds to me
I don't
like
think with private equity, I want to be clear about this. It typically wouldn't be, I mean, it could be, but I don't think it would be a loan. I think it would be, especially in the case of the Big 12, like a private equity
I know it's not going to be an
firm
actual, it's not like a fucking car loan. I'm just
owns
trying
a piece of the conference, just owns a piece of the conference, but still needs returns.
But
like
that's
they don't
worse.
just want to hold it to hold it. Like they don't just want to hold it so that they can have a box at
when I say loan, they're trying
Utah
to
game.
they're trying to invest money to then raise revenue to then become a good investment. If you do that,
exactly, right.
you would still have to raise additional money from somewhere else to make it look like a good investment. And let me tell you something: if TCU wins a national title once, or Utah does once, or whatever, that's not going to fundamentally change anything.
Not
honestly,
the dollars and cents. No, not for the private equity. It might. Here's the thing. This is the mismatch of incentives that I was talking about. Let's say that, like, oh, great, best case scenario. And I apologize for cutting you off, but you make a great point, and I have to get this out. The Big 12 takes on a bunch of money in exchange for 20% of the conference from some private equity firm. Awesome. They give a bunch of it to the schools, and Utah uses that to build an NIL war chest, and they go and they win the national championship next year.
Yes.
That is awesome for Utah financially. Utah, sure, like you might get, in addition to, you know, the additional revenue that the Big 12 gets from you being in the playoff, Utah, you're probably going to see a nice one-time, maybe you're going to see, not even proven. There's a lot of doubt about the Flutie effect, but you might see a nice jump in admissions. You might sell more season tickets. You might be able to fundraise more for your athletic department. Cool for Utah. But from the Big 12's perspective, I mean, is that going to be a needle mover that makes it worth giving up 20% of yourself to a like, I agree with you, Stephen. Even my like asset management friends, which I believe it or not have a couple of, you know, you go to high school with kids, they grow up and do a lot of different kinds of jobs over the years after that. They think it's ridiculous. Like, there's a reason why this is reserved for typically professional sports and not for college sports.
I just don't understand the math. I don't think we're missing something in broad strokes. I've watched the sport long enough to know that you can't artificially inflate a football team to financially support a conference.
Doesn't work. The math does not.
Unless, is there a revenue source that a higher level of play would create that I'm not thinking of?
This is not the way that it works.
This is also for the audience, because I know we have.
This is not
we have
the
a
way
lot
that
of
it works.
people listening. We have a lot of people listening who work at a much, much higher intellectual level in business and finance than my dumbass. But, and I'm like, this is not me trying to argue anybody. I genuinely, this is where I'm at with PE. Looks like a duck, smells like a duck, walks like a duck. Fucking, I don't like ducks. But if you want to sit down and show me the formula, I want to learn why. I want to learn how this is going to work. Because we've had feedback at splitzoneduo.com. We've had feedback from people who do work, and they're like, hey, my industry loves PE, and here's why. Like, it works because I do this kind of job, or I do that kind of job. I'm not telling you that I'm fundamentally opposed to private equity or investment, or like, I'm not doing that. I'm not some dickhead in a Patagonia sleeping in front of a fucking, Bear Stearns protesting. I'm not doing that. I genuinely just want to see the math. Maybe you could talk me into it. I haven't had anybody tell me what the math is yet, and that people who do the fucking math have said, I don't get it. So that's why, that's the biggest thing I'm kind of like scared of. And then the other thing, just to add on my typical hobby horse, when this broke back in January and February, it was greeted credulously by every major media outlet. Like the whiplash did not happen fast enough, in my opinion. Like there's a Pete Thamel ESPN story about it, and like there's no dissemination of the news. It was very much clearly like, oh, I got this from a source, a source, and this is sourced reporting, and that's what's most important at ESPN is to be first. And no one pointed out like, hey, this is fucking bad. This is not a good idea.
They're either going to get their money back or they're going to leave you a lot worse for the wear. And this is not an industry where the fundamentals of the business, to any smart person I've ever talked to, or even any dumb person I've ever talked to, makes sense for private equity and the conferences or the schools to both win as big blocks in the long term. Like, it's not veterinary medicine. Like PE firms have bought a ton of vet clinics, vet companies, pet care companies over the last like 10, 15 years. And they've managed to make a few bucks off this because they can cut costs. They can slash like the standards of care.
Streamline. So I had to put my dog down at one of them, and the experience was like efficient, but that's not necessarily what you want. Sure.
They move you in quick. They charge you a big bill. The economies of scale thing works because a lot of people, more people are going to keep having pets than are going to become fans of West Virginia football. And private equity is not saying this has been good for society. In fact, I would say the opposite, but it's been a pretty good business call for private equity.
He got his injury shot in this.
But like, it just doesn't make sense for college sports. And at mass. Like, I'm not saying that if a school needs to build, one school needs to build a stadium and can't fundraise it. Like USF took a million years to get their stadium funded, and like they need that to grow revenue for the athletics department. I'm not saying that nobody in college sports can ever take institutional money and
they have.
Like I'm not saying. So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
if you're listening,
doesn't math for a mass scale PE infusion into a conference.
If you're a top 50 program, you have taken money, especially like bonds. Like like there's some athletic departments who are not liquid right now because they're still paying shit off. Like for sure. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the sport itself becoming an investment structure for PE. Not like, hey, we want to build this practice facility. We want to get it done. So we're going to, we want to do it in 2 years instead of 3 or whatever. So we're going to take out an aggressive. No, that's not what we're talking about. No, there are plenty of athletic departments with some shaky books or some shitty books, which is why everyone's kind of freaking out right now because they don't know what the compensation structure would be for players. So they're already using I'll put it this way. They're already using college football players as labor as a boogeyman to arrest or suspend spending initiatives that they probably should have never done in the first place, or hiring.
Also, to circle back to the Big 12 point, the Yormark point about it again, when the fact that it is such a bad when it is clear that it was a bad idea, it's not going to be his mess to clean up. And so I don't think it's very honorable for him to be pursuing this path.
He's not alone. This isn't just a Big 12 problem or a Big 12 idea. This is all over the sport right now, save for the very gilded. And you never know. That could change too. So to kind of close this out here, this is not something that we want to tag to the Big 12 specifically. It's just that Yormark has been, I think, a little more friendlier with the commentary on it. So I just want to make that super clear. This isn't just the Big 12. I think it's being studied, one, because he said it out loud a lot, but also there's a very obvious gap that they want to close. I would just, here's the deal. I want to put a button on this. I'm fine with 100 more weird bathing apes, WWE belts, rappers, fucking whatever you want to do. Do that to try and draw in a funny or goofy corporate sponsorship or a weird ticket initiative. Do that to close your gap instead of this.
Yeah, but I also do want to pick on the Big 12 specifically because they've gotten further down the road with it than any of their peers. And there is a story last week in CBS Sports by Dennis that leads off with, quote, Big 12 members are considering a, emphasis mine, first of its kind private equity investment to ensure the league's long-term financial and competitive security. That's the point. It's that Brett gets to have a story written about how he's doing something that nobody has ever done, and he's thinking outside the box, and there's deal points on the table. And again, it's not going to be his mess to clean up.
maybe the structure is unique, and maybe I want to leave the door open and say, like, hey, maybe there is some sort of structural protection or guarantee. It's just that we're not coming at this from the naive liberal media's perspective. We're coming at this actually from the very, I mean, if you've worked in media in the last 20 years, private equity is a little bit like an A24 like villain, just like relentless and devious and sadist. It's not that. It's just that most of what PE touches in this space turns to shit, or it just can't realize what PE wants it to be.
Well, media could be especially jaded about it because of like what it's done to newspapers, what it's done to certain digital media
All
properties.
media.
But like nobody that I know seems to think it makes any sense for college sports. I can't figure out how it does writ large. Like I said, I mean, there might be a specific project for which it makes sense at your given school.
The closing idea is this, aside from the third rail that we just discussed. By all means, if you are hesitant or apprehensive or just actually like adversarial towards this Big Two future, where the Big Ten and the SEC are saying, nope, fuck you. Actually, we want a substantially large, disproportionate amount of the playoff revenue regardless. That's what we deserve, and that's what we're going to do. And as I was told not to worry about a Super League 2 and 3 years ago by people, and guess what? They were all wrong. So as we barrel towards the Super League, if you want to try and create anything that arrests that development, then you shouldn't look at a goofy thing that the Big 12 does with disdain. You should look at it as like, hey, they're out here trying to do something different and trying to do something weird. That's an inherent good right now, I think, for the sport, that they are trying to do something different. The way to view this is as such. Anything that they do, Brett Yormark or the Big 12 moving forward, ask yourself or try and discern, how is this going to work for the individual football properties? How is this going to help? Like, we don't really know how Bathing Ape helps Kansas State football. But the next thing that they do, if it does help Kansas State football and it does help Central Florida and Cincinnati and Arizona State, then it is a net good. It doesn't matter how you get there within reason. That's how you have to measure this. And we're not going to get into the football specifics here, Alex, because we have a conference preview coming up next month. But as I look at this conference, I see no discernible identity yet. It's extremely hard to understand. I've referred to it as a Vegas buffet. And by the way, these aren't pejoratives. This is by far the conference I am most interested in all of college football, at least this season, if not for the next two. Because my God, it's nothing if not a very unruly experiment in how we're going to balance this and how you create a power center, what a model program looks like, how you survive that schedule, the styles clash, the recruiting disparity, all of it. It's very, very interesting to me. So yeah, look at all this shit and figure out as a consumer, is this positively impacting in a financial way the football programs inside of it? The rest of it does not matter.
I think two things about Yormark, and I'll get out of here. Even though I think he's self-aggrandizing and entertaining possibly disastrous business ideas for the Big 12 for which he would not have to deal with the consequences, I think he's been a very good commissioner of this league. And I think there are two reasons for that. The first is that he understands how television works and how the media rights business works better than most people alive, definitely including us. And also, he was pretty early to understand that someone had to die and that was better off for his sake being the Pac-12 than the Big 12. We made fun of him a lot over the last, well, not the last year, but over the course of 2022 and early 2023 for just a really cynical and pretty obvious leak campaign designed to destabilize the Pac-12. And, there were reports coming out at points at which I do not believe to this day it was true at all, that Pac-12 schools were feeling shaky, that the media rights negotiation was going badly, and that the conference was in danger and the Big 12 might snap up its members. I don't think that was true at the time. But what it did do was clearly put pressure on George Kliavkoff at the Pac-12 and clearly create an incentive for university presidents in the Pac-12 to try to remind their own constituents, hey, actually, the deal's coming really soon. It's, it's right around the corner. It's like, it's going to be there in 6 weeks. Just wait. It's going to be there. And I think the Big 12's pressure campaign helped the Pac-12 along to make some self-inflicted errors, basically from the commissioner's office and from some presidents, whether that was turning down a totally workable deal with ESPN or just terrible messaging where you gave different university presidents reasons not to feel confident in the future of the conference. And the Big 12 got the spoils of that because of its own pressure campaign and the Pac-12's failures. And that was Yormark doing that. And I think that was cynical, but very impressive work on his part. And the other thing is that he just understood the value of adding, not just because more people in the boat, the more security you have and the harder it is to pull apart the conference, but understanding the value of sports in the current cord-cutting moment and the kind of paradox where the decline of cable TV has not yet hurt sports at all because it's the one thing that gives, say, an ESPN or a Fox leverage over cable providers. Hey, you need to carry FS1, you need to carry ESPN, you need to carry ESPNU. Yormark understood that, and somehow, some way, the Big 12 schools that were there before are not going to be significantly poorer, if at all. In fact, they're probably going to make a little bit more money than they were when Texas and Oklahoma were in the league. And yeah, they're going to fall further and further behind because the Big 10 and the SEC are doing this times 60. But that's a better case than having to, sell the goalposts, which is what we were looking at in 2021. So I think he's done a very good job. I just think he's out for himself.
Well, yeah, as every conference commissioner is. I mean, I don't think he is no more or less cynical than Greg Sankey or Petiti or anybody. This is what you do. Like, he helped kill the Pac-12, but like I would argue that, the headshot was delivered by someone else, and then he was able to sort of maybe harvest some organs for his own benefit as the body was decaying. This got bleak fast. These are corporate-minded individuals. We talked about ad brain today. We talked about, the fact that these aren't sports people anymore, and this is what it's like. This is the reality. And so, yeah, he might be cynical, but I think it's funny how we forgive cynicism. We forgive the cynicism of the winners, and then when anyone looks like they're reaching, it suddenly becomes like an offense. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah. Like pick me.
But as long as he stays weird, I'm happy because we're going to need a lot more weird in the next couple of years to keep this thing from the homogenizing pace or structure it's headed towards.